Okay, Tony, we're live. Thank you again for joining me and taking the time to do this. I will give you the floor. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself for my audience so they kind of understand your background and what you do specifically for entrepreneurs.
Hi, thank you for having me, Connor. It's an absolute pleasure. And I'm Toni McLelland. I am in the UK, so I spend some of my time in South Wales and some in London. I'm a mother, grandmother, and all of those personable things. But in terms of what I do, I am a critical friend and a business mentor, and I work specifically with C-suite leaders and board members around social causes. So social causes that might be, working on specific things around social causes, environmental factors. It could be sustainability. It could be, social things that are making the environment better or people better. So specialist education, criminal justice, those types of things. But one of the other things that I do, I really, really do love mentoring social entrepreneurs, because when I'm working at the sharp end in crisis with these larger organizations, I love bringing the work 360 back to those social entrepreneurs that are starting out really early in their journey, and sharing that learning so that they've got a really, really great start starting out. So
And
hopefully that's okay.
no, yeah, that's very helpful. And what is the difference you find when working with a big corporation versus an entrepreneur, where the business they're forming is the social cause is the business versus working with a large organization? What are the differences, or how do you approach those differently?
Well, I think the bigger cause is it's some of it is around the time aspect, because they can't just pivot straight away. There's lots of things that they have to consider. They have to consider people. They have to consider the profit, or the performance. How they need to consult. Do they need to co-produce, co-create, and get other people involved? So it's who is the market? What are they trying to do? What is their bigger purpose? And I think it's a little bit more complex. There's a lot more moving parts you have to consider. Whereas with an individual person, it's a little bit easier to pivot. They may not necessarily be so established yet. It could be that they're a solo entrepreneur or have a smaller team just starting out. So for me, I think it's timing is the big thing. The amount of time it takes. A smaller organization can move quicker, less people to consult, and they can move a lot quicker. So that's kind of like one of the main things in terms of the differences, really.
Hmm. And can you maybe think back to your career? It seems that recently social causes, especially for larger corporations and organizations, have come into focus more recently. Is that a fair assessment, or has this always been on the radar for a larger corporation to have this social focus kind of outside maybe their core mission or core of what they do, or is it a recent
Yeah,
phenomenon,
I
say over
think
the
it's
last
always
five, ten
been
years?
there. It's always been there, but it's been higher on the agenda. It's more of a priority, especially around things like funding, etc. But for me, I've been in the industry for 30 years, and it's always been a part of me. And the difference for me is that I've sat and I've been, leading some of these organizations from a different perspective. So I'm in it rather than outside it. And now what I'm doing is being outside it, understanding what the gaps are, what is needed, and helping social entrepreneurs to position themselves to be able to, serve these organizations. But it's most definitely the last few years, and even more so since the pandemic, it's been higher up on the agenda. The social causes, sustainable development, environmental, social, and governance agendas, ESG around the finance. Corporate social responsibility has always been around forever, but there's more of a focus on that. And I think some of it is around the people aspect, and not to mention diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. DEIB, that is much, much higher. And there's been, some main events that have kind of contributed to it being higher up on the agenda as well. So, it does mean that for organizations, they have got to think about this if they want to become a market leader. And also, since the pandemic as well, you've had organizations that have really had to think about how they position themselves, reevaluate their services. But in order to be sustainable, what they've got to do is make sure that they embed these things within their organizations, to be able to be sustainable in the future and be a market leader, really.
And when I think about this, and when I've talked to other entrepreneurs, other business owners, right, or I think at the core of what an entrepreneur is trying to do is trying to serve others. And so I think about this with like larger companies, and I'm wondering why companies need to focus on this, right? And maybe an example is, and this is kind of random, but something I just thought of. If you are a hospital or a healthcare provider, your job is to provide those healthcare services to the community, and that's your core mission. Why do you need to go above and beyond and also have this other arm focusing on social causes as well? I mean, does that make sense, right? If you
Yeah,
are
I think.
focusing on the social causes outside of your core mission or your core product or service you're providing, is that I'm just curious around your view of the need for doing that as well.
Well, I think that, like I said, those agendas have come more to the fore. We've got the things like the pandemic. It really highlighted how, you know, um, supply chains were affected. Things like the war and how that's impacted us on, fuel and these types of things. It's bigger than us, and these things have an impact. So, for example, energy costs. How the war has had an impact on those costs. And so, therefore, when it comes to people working within organizations and working from home, for example, we've got to be able to think about the impact on that. Traveling, fuel costs more, energy costs more within the home, home working, those kind of things have to be considered. But you've also got things like sustainable development goals, which, all organizations should be meeting by the year of 2030. And that has come even more to the fore. And because that date is there, not all organizations are going to be meeting it by that date. But what it does mean is that if you are behind that, you're going to be ahead of others. Right now we're in 2023, but actually, you're going to be 7 years ahead of others if you put those things in practice now. You don't need to wait until 2030. So I think ultimately, we as organizations, you have to think about, well, what is it that's going to make me sustainable should there be another pandemic? How can I do some contingency planning here? But I think the other point to highlight as well is the fact that entrepreneurs are different to social entrepreneurs as well. And I really am advocating the social entrepreneurs. Yes, entrepreneurship is great, and I'm advocating those people as well. But I'm really championing the social entrepreneurs that are doing good and want to do good and feel that, for some reason or another, they can't charge for their services, or it's seen as a free service, or just generosity, or like a passion project. But actually, what my message is about the social entrepreneur side of it, and how you know really helping organizations with their social aspects can be can position you as a market leader and help you with to become a sustainable business. That's
Mhm.
really the social aspect of it. And that's what makes some of the work, I know we'll probably talk about this later on, but that's what makes some of the work that I'm doing a little bit unique in that kind of sense, because the social entrepreneur bit is really, yeah.
Yeah. And can you maybe, from your perspective, how do you define a social entrepreneur versus a typical entrepreneur from your perspective? What are those key differences?
Well, I think the social entrepreneur is really the business or the cause that is really about making a social difference and an impact in the community. So it could be around championing particular groups. It could be around, unemployment. It could be around homelessness. These types of things. And I've always been in this industry. My main, my main clients are the Metropolitan Police or the National Health Service or the Prison Service. So there's always some kind of social aspect or public interest aspect around, the causes that I kind of work with. But the main thing is that they're delivering a social cause, and it could be a charity or a community interest company, where maybe the emphasis is not so much on profit, the emphasis is on about generating proceeds so that can be reinvested back into the business and help the business to grow and this particular cause to grow. I'm not saying that you can't make a profit, but actually this is what social entrepreneurship is about, making a difference in the community, which is really what all business should be about. But unfortunately, it's not. A lot of them are about making lots of money. But if you are focused in on the purpose, then as a byproduct of that, then you make money.
Hmm. Yeah, I think it's a good point. But maybe you can kind of go into, you talked about it just there. You talked about profit, but and you brought up homelessness. Maybe we can use that as an example. I mean, if I were to come to you and say, okay, I want to help solve homelessness in London or contribute to the community and the problem, I mean, how would you recommend that I approach that? Because I agree it is a good cause, but at the end of the day, you need support, you need funding in order to achieve your mission, right? So how do you recommend that those social entrepreneurs approach the problem so that they, they're not striving for a profit, but they have money to push forward with their goal?
Well, I think the first thing, and it's something that I've kind of said a lot recently, is to first of all think about who's going to pay, who is going to pay for the service, and that helps you in terms of which direction, the first things you need to think about as that social entrepreneur. It'll help you with your structure, how you're going to set up the business. Do you want to make a profit, or do you want to apply for public funds? Do you feel that people should be paying for this service privately, independently, or do you feel that the government should be paying? So really understand who is your client, who is going to pay for the service. But then that kind of leads me straight into thinking about your purpose. What is your purpose? Not only as individuals, but as organizations or companies, we need to think about what is the purpose of what we're trying to do? What is the mission, vision, and values that are embedded within the organization or yourself as an individual? And quite often, and this is where I talk quite freely about I love the ikigai and the purpose Venn diagram, because when you combine those two together, you've got the ikigai, which is a sweet spot right in the middle between, and there are 4 key questions in the purpose Venn. And those are, what is it that you love? What are you good at? What can you be paid for? And what does the world need? And if you can answer those 4 questions, it will help to guide you in terms of going in the right direction. Because, in the example that I sometimes use, it's not a great example, but it's a clear example, is that, what do I like? I like singing. Does the world need it? No. Am I good at it? No. But I absolutely love it. I
Mhm.
enjoy it. And I think that sometimes people get a bit twisted in terms of, this is something that I love doing. They don't think about whether they're good at it. They just love it. And so therefore they push it into a business. And I think that the purpose then and using the ikigai, which is a Japanese concept, will help you to consolidate some of that information in terms of the direction you're going in. So who's going to pay and what is the purpose? So purpose and finance are the 2 starting fundamental pieces. And also understanding, how much revenue you need to be generating, how much do you mean your turnover needs to be in the first year, for example, because you can have your purpose, you can think about the finance, this is what I need, but actually, if your figures are not realistic, then it's going to change everything. And quite often, what happens is people shift the fund, the money side of it, how much they're charging, when really they need to shift the target group and the service offer. So those are the things that I would say fundamentally are what you need to be thinking about as a social entrepreneur starting out in business.
And do social entrepreneurs typically come to you with an idea, or like you just talked about, do you help them formulate their idea, or is it typically like, hey, I want to do good, but I don't know how. I don't know how to
It
start
could
an
be either.
organization, a company, a cause.
It can be either. If
Okay.
they come to me and say, well, I want to do good, but I don't know how, then it's about defining their purpose. What is your purpose? Or maybe this is something that is coming out, it's coming through as something that is a really good strength of yours, something that runs through, it underpins you as an individual. So maybe some exploration around what is your purpose will take you to what that business should be initially. And if they come to me saying, well, actually, this is the business that I want to be doing, then really asking themselves questions like, well, how can we refine this? How can we make you different to everybody else? What is your value proposition? These are the kind of things that will help you initially, to shape your service, set you apart, and move towards being really successful. Also, if you start to underpin some of the things like sustainable development goals within there, which ones of the 17 are aligned with your business, that will help to put you ahead. So if, for example, you're working with products, are they environmentally friendly? How do what's your recycling like? All of these types of things will help to put you ahead because you're ticking more boxes. So ultimately, that's kind of, they come with either. Sometimes they come with a concept, and after I've spoken to them, they realize that it's not going to work, because sometimes I just ask them, well, who's going to pay? And then they realize, haven't figured that bit out. Well, that's a crucial part of making it sustainable. And other times they don't have a clue. But I help them to find out what they're doing and how, what their purpose is, and how they can maybe give them some direction, maybe.
Okay. And I'm curious, from your perspective, are there specific causes that you see a biggest need for in the market from a social entrepreneurship perspective? I know you talked about um, thinking about the environment, homelessness have come up a couple times. You talked about how you work with bigger government organizations in the UK, the NHS, prison systems. I mean, are there specific areas you focus on, or is it really a wide net of any sort of social good, social cause?
It's for me personally, the services that I work with are predominantly regulated services. So there's some kind of regulation, some kind of inspection that they need to, be passing. Some kind of compliance that, it could be specialist education, criminal justice, it could be social care. Those are my main areas. But the gap that's out there is really about this whole piece around bringing in more people-centered approaches, the review of the HR function, and really diversity and inclusion, or DEIB, diversity, equity, inclusion and belonging. And balancing that out with making profit. I think that people are really struggling with that. Organizations are really struggling with that. They're either really going in for it and being really, really cutthroat, or actually being too compassionate, misinterpreting that compassion for kindness and being yes people, and not really. But it's about finding that balance. And so sometimes I refer to myself as a compassionate businesswoman, because what I want to get over to people is that there's absolutely nothing wrong with being compassionate as an organization and being a compassionate business and actually making profit too. And there's a way that you can do the two. And that's where I come in. I show organizations how to do that. So that's a massive gap. People think that it's all about being cutthroat, but it's really about being skillful as a leader. And one of the gaps that I find as well is that there's a big difference when people come to me and then, or in a leading an organization, there's a big difference between being really, really good at a skill, being a really good people leader, and having really good business acumen. And what's happening is that there's a lot of, really good people leaders now leading organizations, and that's great. But if you haven't got any business acumen, you're going to be leading people down the garden path. So ultimately, it's a combination of the three: a good skill, people leader, and business acumen. You can come with a vision and get people on board. So you have to be really people friendly with that as well. And I've got my own model, which is called a blend model, which is really about understanding people and getting them on board. The more you understand people, the more easier your work becomes in terms of communication, change, work, effectiveness, efficiency, etc.
And yeah, I think that kind of lends into my next question. If you're an entrepreneur or work for a large organization, how do you build that culture? Because I feel like there's a sense now that the younger generation, Gen Z, I mean, whether it's true or not, they're not as excited to go to work for a big corporation or go to work at all. How do you build culture? How do you attract those young people that you need to drive the business forward and have a successful organization?
Well, I think some of it is about well, what I call having a compassionate business and compassionate leadership. And so that's what I do. I use compassion in business and leadership, along with diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging. To They underpin, any organization in business for success and make them sustainable. So I think that is, and I also have something called the 4 Ps, which is about purpose, people, planet, and profit, and making sure that those are incorporated in there. I have compassionate Cs, which is around communication and community, because it's around how you communicate, what you communicate, who you're communicating with, as well as remembering it's not I, it's we, it's about the people. So the other C's are not only community and communication, but they're co-production, co-creation, and consultation. Because believe it or not, you need to remember that there's other people. So some of the things as well is about making sure that as a leader, you empower others. So it's not about ego. It's not about I've got all this power and I need to make all of these decisions. It's about, using that power to empower others. You don't become more powerful by holding on to power. You become more powerful by giving it away to empower others. Because as they rise, you rise. Yeah. And that's
Yeah.
that's how it kind of works, the whole ripple effect. So as a leader, the more you can get people empowered, the more they take on board, the more they're accountable and responsible, and your work becomes much easier. So becoming an inclusive, compassionate organization has benefits for all. And I think that people need, how you speak to people publicly, the values that you portray. Are you living your values? All of these things will help, in the reputation of the organization. And I think that's really important. I think that there's been some really extreme examples of where the organizations, the people within the organizations have really kind of stumped their feet, and things have started to change and move, as opposed to the directors making all the decisions. It's very much people led. So that's really where you want to kind of be going. Respect the people, bring them on board, make it inclusive and diverse, and it will really pay dividends.
Yeah, I forget where I heard this, but I think I heard someone say that to be an effective manager or director, you essentially should not be needed, right? So I think it speaks back to that delegation piece where if you're truly empowering your team, you step back, they have the autonomy to make the decisions, and then you as the director, you say, okay, wow, I've created this team that's so efficient that they're doing all the work essentially on my behalf or for the organization, which I think is hard to do, right? Because then it kind of comes across, okay, well then am I important? Am I needed? But
But you don't
if you've
really
done
want to
that,
be needed. You don't want to be needed, to be
yeah,
honest with you. And I think that people feel that they do want to be needed, but ultimately, and it's this whole piece around, you recruit people that are better than you at this particular thing. That's what builds an organization. But ultimately, what mainly happens is that people recruit people that are just not quite as good as them. Do you see what I mean? For
hmm
example, but it's a random example, but I commissioned somebody to do a piece of work for me recently, and we were talking about the brief, and I said, well, the one that you done for yourself was great, but I want mine better than yours, the one that you done for yourself. And I
hmm
think it kind of put him in a really uncomfortable position, because it's like, do you really want to be doing something for somebody else that is better than the one you've done for yourself? Well, actually, yes, you should be, because then you
yeah.
will always have work.
And does this tie back into compassion, or you brought up compassion a couple times now? Can you maybe define that so from your perspective, I can understand what it means? Like, how do you define compassion? I think it is a
Okay,
good
so
word and we've
compassion is
all
a
heard it, but how do you define it?
so it's a heart-led, action-orientated approach that brings real human connection. Yeah, and it has outstanding results for the organization and culture. So it's not empathy, it's not pity, it's not sympathizing, it's compassion is when you are taking action to relieve the suffering of others. So I can empathize or I
Mm.
can sympathize with you, but actually, if I'm having a one-to-one meeting with you and you're a member of staff in my team, I might say, right, okay, to Connor, what can I do to help you? You've explained the situation. So you've explained the situation, you've explained your difficulties, and rather than me saying, oh, I'm sorry about that, etc., the conversation continues into how can I help you with that? So it's
Yeah.
moving
Yeah.
to action to relieve the suffering of somebody else.
So, do you ever feel? I think about this sometimes that is misguided. So, right, corporations or businesses I talked about earlier are there to serve others, but I oftentimes think about some of the very large companies that exist, and don't need to name names, but fast food, right? And you have food that is pretty clearly not good for the end user. So I don't know if you ever kind of wrestle with that, where very large corporations can sometimes be misguided, where someone doesn't need to be eating fast food every day, but yet that company offers that food to its customers every day, and some eat too much and it damages their health. Do you ever think about that in how that's why companies exist, but sometimes they're not delivering the good that they should be, and that has negative consequences on society? I mean, is that ever
Okay.
a thought that crosses your mind?
Always, but I don't go that deep into it. The main essence of what my teaching is, or anybody that I'm mentoring, is this: always have good intention. And there are times in business, what makes you a really good business leader and somebody that's respected is when you make decisions that benefit all, that benefit the organization, not just you. Because what you need to remember is that, sometimes you're asked for advice. You may ask me a piece of advice, Connor, and I might give you that advice to my benefit. Oh, well, if you do it this way and this way, thinking about the fact that all this money that I'm going to make from it. But actually, if I give you some honest advice about what you need, even if it doesn't directly benefit me, is really the best way to go, because you'll find that you're building trust and you're likely to come back because I gave you honest, trusting advice. Yeah. So that's the
Hmm.
thing about it, is always think about what is best for the organization, even if it's not best for you. And then you'll be going in the right direction. What is best for the
Okay.
organization, best for the people that you serve. And you might find that, well, actually, it's not the best thing for me, but you've got to go with it if that is what is best. When people go wrong, they start thinking about what's best for me. They start being driven by money. We can make more money by selling fast food every day, like your example. We can make more money, but actually, if you show that you actually care, that makes a difference.
Yeah, and I think that's hard, right? I know you said you've worked with larger organizations. I mean, if you're a publicly traded company, for example, you answer to shareholders, and the expectation is that every quarter, every year, earnings per share, profit goes up and up and up. So again, maybe it's that balance, or it's just that slow shift that takes us in that direction. I think that's just a hard thing to overcome. If you're the CEO of a large organization, you say, I have to meet these goals, or my job's on the line, or our shares decline in value,
Okay.
which also hurts people because people own those shares and they have invested in us to provide for their families. Just another piece of it that comes to mind.
Yeah, no. Well, what I would say on the back of that is, I wouldn't say I need to meet these goals. I would say we need to meet these goals. because it comes back to that whole community piece. And the more you involve people, the more you empower them, the more you're delegating out some of the accountability and responsibility. So rather than taking it, yes, you own it, but rather than taking it upon yourself, you say, well, actually, this is what we need to do. How are we going to do that? Do you see what I mean? Because then you're sharing that responsibility, you're sharing that accountability. Everybody's got to step up. And by everybody taking that ownership, you're relieving your own, what you have to do in that kind of sense. When I manage large teams or oversee large teams, this is where I love the 80-20, even though it's not used in this way, but I apply it in this way because when I'm managing large teams, I spend 80% of my time on my teams, on my leadership team, and on the people. I make sure I never miss an appraisal, miss a supervision, miss something that's really important to them. I'm not locked in the office. I'm out there on the floor some of the time. I'm not sneaking in through the back door. I'm the last one to leave, and I'm shuffling people out through the door. So really thinking about that. And then the other 20% is the work that I have to do, the things that I have to sign, only I can do. But I find that when I invest my time in the 80% of people, they're happy to do it. I'm stuck on a piece of work, they want to stay behind and help me to do it. If I give them an hour off for their child's sports day, they want to give me 5 hours back because they're ever so great. Do you see what I mean? Not that you take the 5 hours, but just by giving and being more compassionate in your approach, you get an awful lot more back, and people are more willing. It's a team effort. You help each other out. It's not just, oh, that's that team's target. It's like, well, if we can do something to help that team because we're all in this together, that's the kind of essence that you want. And then, when you're going to the board or you're part of the board and you're accounting for those kind of things, it becomes easier. And it's like, as leaders, Connor, I think it's worth saying that as leaders, people always feel that, well, you've got to know all the answers, we need to know everything, but actually you don't. It's okay to go to your teams and your staff and say, well, what do you think about this? What are your thoughts around this? Because they're the ones that are delivering it and they know better than you. They may know. And you'll find that if you ask people, they're quite happy to tell you. So we don't need to guess and presume and assume. We could just ask the questions and remain curious.
And is that an issue or something you see? Maybe either it's a founder or a CEO, they're apprehensive to approach staff and appear to be ignorant on a topic. Is that something that most are apprehensive to do because they feel they'll be judged or looked down upon it for doing so?
They feel a bit vulnerable. They feel vulnerable as a leader. They want to, because leaders have, quite a few of them have a lot of ego. They want to be right about everything. They don't want to listen. That's about some of their own insecurities, isn't it? But myself as a leader, what I do is I encourage diverse thought, diverse thinking, inclusive thinking. You're going to learn an awful lot more. I was doing some work with a director that was, about inclusive leadership and compassionate leadership. And one of the things that they said, oh, this has been really, really insightful. When they finished today, what they were going to do was go away and check all of their buildings and make sure that they were all, accessible, wheelchair accessible and things like that. So, and do a report. And I said, well, actually, why are you going to do that? Why would you do that? Why not allocate this to somebody in your team or look throughout the organisation to see if there's anyone that has a disability and is a wheelchair user? Get them to do the project for you because you're going to get some really, really insightful information. You are not a wheelchair user, so you're not going to know everything. You're not going to know all the answers. But if you ask that person, they're going to tell you where the difficulties are in the building and what those are. So, and it will empower them at the same time. And it's less work for you. To get them to do it, it's going to be better. It's going to be more on point. It's going to be more accurate. And then you can add your little spin as a director. And I think that Sometimes people feel that they have to own everything all the time.
And what do you say to those leaders that can't let go? Because I think it's something I've struggled a bit with in the past as well, to say, oh, but I will do it better. I mean, is that just not having trust or faith in the team that you built and hired? How do you get someone to fully let go, a leader, and delegate?
Well, do you know the thing about it is, and this is where I mentioned about my blend model as well, because it's about understanding the people that you're working with too, and what their strengths are, what their areas that need further development. You know, the blend model is B for behavior, L for learning, E for environment, N for network, and D for development. And that came from the B is from my criminal justice background, innate taught learned habitual behavior. The L is from my educational background, leading schools, specialist education. So that's kinesthetic, audio, and visual learning. The E for environment come from social care, my social care background, and that's about children in children's homes. How do environmental factors have an impact on how people learn and thrive? So the N is for network, who's around you that influences you, and D is for development, which is your own self-awareness and your own development. And so when you think about that and you start thinking about that in terms of the context of individuals within your team, you're better able to identify, what somebody's strengths are, or is it the environment that is affecting the way that they work? Do they need to change environment? Do we need to present the information in a different way? Do you see what I mean? I've tried to show
Mm-hmm.
somebody when I started off when I was a treasurer of an organization, a little social organization we had. I used to do the books in this way. And when I passed it over to someone else to do the books, it's like, no matter how I showed it to them, they just didn't grasp it. And I said, well, look, this is what we need to get to at the end of the day. Show me your way. And sometimes we need to do it. We need to let them have the space to do it their way and show us. And I think that that's what some of it is about. And I was fortunate to have really good leaders, managers along the way, directors that I used to work for along the way in my early career that just gave me the space to do what I wanted to do what I needed to do, without dictating how it was going to happen. The only thing that I needed to ask them was, they'd say to me about the boundaries, some of the boundaries, or we need to check this legally. But other than that, they just left me to it. And I think that, when we talk about delegation, which is really important for social entrepreneurs, I know that we've gone into leadership, delegation, it's really important that social entrepreneurs understand that they don't have to do everything themselves. You don't, because you're running a business, you don't have to go and make your own website. You don't have to go through all tedious things. There are people that specialize in this and can do it. So save your knowledge and your experience for things that you can do really, really well, which goes back to the Ikigai and the purpose Venn diagram, what you're really good at.
Yeah. And I've talked about this with other guests as well. I mean, it really is, it just freeing up your time. I think that you initially have the belief that says, if I do everything, it'll be done better and therefore I'll be more successful. But I think when you actually do it, like you said, if you're a social entrepreneur, but you say, okay, I have to build a website, I have to do all these other things as well. I mean, if you free yourself up to do the things that you can focus on, you actually will end up being more successful, right? So it's just overcoming that incorrect belief of like, if I let go of control, things will not go well, but it's often the opposite is true.
Absolutely. And there's sometimes where people come to me and they say, well, they've been on a course to build their own website and they've built their own website and they're really proud of it. And I look at it and I think, doesn't,
Yeah.
And actually leave the people that can do those things. And even though I understand about business, understand about finance and HR and recruitment, all these things in leading a business, I still have people that know more about this around me. So if we're in a meeting, I will say to my, finance manager, are you okay with that? Any questions from you? Because if he's okay, I'm okay. Do you see what I mean? And the same thing with the HR person. Is there anything that really jumps out? I will say from my perspective, but actually they live it day in and day out. So They're going to know more than me. Their heads are the ones that are in that particular piece of guidance or legislation every day. So ultimately, it's for them to guide me, to a certain extent, as opposed to me guiding them. And we know from world leaders, whether it be the prime minister, or the president, they have a team of advisors around them.
Mm-hmm.
Every time they go to say something,
and I think it comes back. Yeah, and what I was going to say too is I think you can go back to social entrepreneurs, right? And if you compare a social entrepreneur that's just trying to do everything themselves versus a large company, I mean, in order for your cause to get really big and touch the most people, at a certain point, you're going to have to let go, and you're going to have to hire HR, finance, legal, marketing. And so by hiring the correct people that are experts in what they do, it will allow your cause, your company to grow, which in turn allows you to reach more people. So you have to realize that you need to let go to truly have a bigger impact, right? And that's something you don't realize at the beginning.
Absolutely. I was working with somebody who called me in a crisis once. It was like, the liquidators were coming in. It was really too late for him because it was at that point where liquidators were coming in. But I, compassionately, I felt like, okay, let me go down and see him anyway. I spent an hour with him, but I kind of established that what he was really, really good at was, going to these meetings, promoting his business and selling the services. But actually, what he wasn't good at was managing people. And that's the bit where he needed to get somebody in to come in and manage the people, because they were just taking some liberties with him and the procedures and pay and all sorts of things. And it didn't work out very, very well at all. So always think about what it is that you can do, that what's the best way, where are you best positioned, and are you going to be the face of the business, or what's your actual function in there? What are you good at? And we can outsource some of the other things.
So I think I want to pivot now. Maybe we can focus on you and your story. I know we touched on it briefly and kind of how you came to be to where you are today, right? How did you decide to come in and be an entrepreneur yourself, and also be a mentor, a consultant to social entrepreneurs and C-suite leaders? I think you touched on it briefly earlier in the conversation. You have a background in the criminal justice, education, social work spaces. So can I understand a little more about your story and how it's influenced what you do today?
Yeah, I think I've been in this industry for 30 years, and I've kind of looked at it as research. I wouldn't even say that it's a career, it's more research, because in criminal justice, I was really wanting to understand, about how people behave, criminal behavior. And I studied law and everything as well. So that whole piece about applied criminology and the social sciences as well. And innate, taught, learnt, habitual, really got to understand that, wanted to know how people changed behavior, went into specialist education, understood about learning, because people have to unlearn and relearn. And I was really getting to understand that in order for people to change, you have to understand what type of behavior it is. Is it something that's embedded from they were young? And if so, they would deem that as normal. So coming in and saying to a CEO, well, actually, you need to change. It doesn't work like that. You've got to really understand the behavior, and there are different strategies that need to be applied to each. I then wanted to understand about vulnerable groups and how environmental factors have an impact. So I went into social care, really wanted to know about how young people in that kind of environment thrived and how they took on board education. I created a model which was around behavior, learning, and education. The model didn't necessarily work as I wanted it to. It didn't work all of the time because I realized it needs to be more bespoke, especially for the leader. So then we started looking at the N for network, because it doesn't matter what else you put in place as part of somebody changing, you realize that if that person is influenced by other people in the network negatively, it's always going to have an impact on them and their own development. And so that's where the model is now. And when I work it and I work it around a leader, I generally find that people sit within one or two of those spaces really strongly. And that's where the biggest shift has to happen for them to to change. And I kind of realized that my career was based on some of this research that is not just out in the field or academic, but I've had the experience, I've got the scars and the wounds. And so for me, when I look back, I realized that compassion was something that ran all the way through there. And, how can I apply this compassion? So compassion, it feels to me, has always been a winner. It's been a common denominator. And so it felt right, especially in the current climate, that, businesses are around compassion. And so that's the work that I do. I understand crisis and crisis management because being in organizations where, there's always incidents that are happening, whether it be the police or NHS, it's always some kind of crisis instance or of some kind of sort, or really vulnerable groups and some kind of unpredictability. And so for me, having spent my time understanding that, learning that, that's why I go into those organizations now, because I've been leading organizations that have been doing that. I understand what is needed. But the mentoring part is really about bringing that 360 back to those that are just starting out in business. Because I remember when I was in those positions, I used to think, oh my gosh, I wish I had somebody that done this. I wish I had somebody that done that. There were real gaps in the services and there was nobody that done these things. So I'm best in a position where I can guide them in terms of what's needed around compliance, what's needed around some of these areas to plug those gaps and set them in those industries even more so. So whether it's homelessness or health, the compliance and the things that are needed for, because I understand what the organization needs. So that's kind of gives a little bit more of an insight. And so based on that, we do a range of consultancies, but, we do audits as well around compassion. But the space that I'm in at the moment is I'm really passionate about helping those social entrepreneurs with the learning. And so I've got a number of, initiatives, whether it be one-to-one, one-to-one mentoring or group mentoring, memberships that people can come and join up and be a part of. And I'm committed to helping people in this area. Let's get it right.
So I'm curious, you brought it back kind of to entrepreneurship again. Do you feel that entrepreneurs can help solve some of those more challenging issues? For example, homelessness, environmental issues. Is that what's going to take us out of it? I know too, just to kind of round this out, you talked about how you have worked with larger governmental organizations. And so when you think of social services, right, I think of the government that steps in and provides
Mm-hmm.
those for vulnerable people, families, etc. But do you think there's a path where more so entrepreneurship can help solve these issues as well? Do you think that's the
I
path forward?
absolutely do, and I'll tell you why. Because these people that are social entrepreneurs, they usually have a story that brings them to the point that they're at, whether it's their own personal experience or they've seen something or witnessed something. So there's something that has got them to that point. And so there's already the purpose in there, the passion is in there, the driving force is in there. They want to make a difference. And so going and helping these organizations or leading these organizations, they're going to be in a good place. Quite often, you've got leaders of organizations that don't have these experiences. It's all academic. Yeah. And they lose touch with what's really happening on the ground. So even though they might have an idea about the business aspect of it, the sustainable development, and that business acumen side of it, they don't really grasp necessarily, the practicalities or the realistic vision around some of these aspects becoming successful within a business. So, that's the thing. It's the drive, it's the passion. And sometimes they need that. They need that sense of purpose and real attachment with the values around that. And you normally, well, I shouldn't really normalize it, but I see it an awful lot with social entrepreneurs because they're on a mission and they've got
Mm-hmm.
a good story behind it. They've got the user experience, the lived experience, and they know what they want to do.
Is the biggest challenge, though, and I think we talked about this earlier, is that social entrepreneurs face is that revenue or profit perspective, I think we've talked about that you shouldn't necessarily just try to maximize profit. But I think we both agree that there needs to be some revenue or someone paying for something in order for a business to exist and continue into the future. Is that kind of the biggest problem they need to solve? Is like, okay, this is going to do a lot of good, but how is it going to be funded and how is it going to be sustained?
Yeah, I think that's a big piece, the money aspect of it, especially if you're coming out of corporate, which is quite often the case. It's like, how do I ask for money? How much do I charge? What is my shaping their services, understand their target group, but most importantly, understanding a business model. The business model, not the business plan, is how you make money. You know, you make money through your business model. And if there's no means to make money, then it's not really going to be a really good so the business model is part of the business plan. Just understanding the purpose and their finance. What are you trying to do? Have you thought about these bigger agendas and how you're going to get into these organizations? You really have to be on point, because there's lots of people that have got great ideas, but they just don't know how to get into those organizations. And so you have to be really, really smart about it. And I think that the money aspect is a piece. Value proposition. Why should I come to you, Connor, for your service? What makes you stand out? And when people ask me similar things, or when I'm demonstrating that, I've got my own model. I've been in the industry 30 odd years. I've got some fairy dust, which is remarkable. I know you've asked me about fairy dust before, but it's about creating that impact. And actually, if I can't identify where I can add value, then you're not going to be my client, because I can't add value. I'm not going to just take money for the sake of taking it. I want to make a difference, and that's about me. You have to be a compassionate business, and I've also lived compassionately as a leader, and I can show you how to embed those things with the use of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. And I've got lots of cases where I can give lots of examples of when that approach has worked. So ultimately, I think people need to really focus in on their value proposition, really think about that, and be focused in on making the difference. The greater the difference that you can make, the greater the money. That's kind of where it kind of goes. You want the money to be the last thing that they think about in terms of
Mm-hmm.
engaging you in their service. You need to add so much value. And that's the kind of thing. So the example that I sometimes use is that I love Jaguar cars. I'll go to a Jaguar showroom and I'll see this black car spinning around, and I'm in love. I want this car. The car starts talking to me. Toni, come over. The door opens. I jump in. Music is playing. Take me for a spin, it says. I'm in love. I want this car. It's coming home with me. I've not even thought about how much it costs yet, because I want it so much. Yeah?
Yeah. And I think that's a feeling, right? It's a feeling that it gives you of the
Yeah, that's
value.
right. I want it.
It's
I want it.
the
The cost,
emotion. Yeah.
that's right. The cost hasn't got me to that point. It's the emotion that's got me. Oh, I've worked out I'm going to play all these music. And when I've got to that point before I've even said to the salesman, how much is it? But if it's out
Yeah.
of my range, then I'm going to be thinking about how I'm going to come back for it tomorrow, how I'm going to raise the funds, how I'm going to do this, because I realize that how much I need this thing in my life. So, and how much it's going to help me, even though a Jaguar car might not necessarily help me. I'll just use that as an example. But I've bought into the idea already.
Yeah. And I think it's a good point. Or if you think about Jaguar and all the money they put into R&D and marketing and the brand to make you feel that way. And it's doing the job that they want it to for you, right? That's what
Hey, what are you
that's
trying to
what
say?
they're
They've done the job.
yeah,
Yes, they have, really,
yeah,
haven't
right.
they?
Yeah. Yeah, or they've created a great product, right, that makes you want it, makes you want to purchase it or participate, and so you need to think through the
Absolutely.
same thing, regardless of your product or service or your cause or your goal. Right? It all
It's
comes
like
back
you're
to that.
thinking how, how this driving in this car is going to make me feel. So with your service, for example, it's about, how much better I'm going to be if I take on board the service that Connor is offering me. I'm going to be so much better. I can do all these different things now that I can't do. You visualize it. So all of that happens before we've even got to how much. But the
Hmm.
price shouldn't be the decider, necessarily. The price shouldn't necessarily be the decider. And one of the things that I say is, you know, don't chase the money, chase the results. So yes, you've got your business set out, your revenue, what you're driving towards. But once you know that, put that to the back of your mind and focus in on the results, because money can get you distracted. You start spending it
Hmm.
before you've even got it. And if you think someone's not going to pay, it affects the quality of what you're delivering. So really focusing on the results, do good piece of work, and the business will keep coming. I worked 3 years ago with somebody. 3 years ago it was, just over 3 years ago now. And I'd done a great piece of work, and he said to me, now my mum wants to work with you, my wife wants to work with you, and I'm 15 referrals later as a part of that whole network. And some of that 15 is pieces of work, not 15 individual people, but pieces of work. Do you see what I mean? Where some people just keep coming back. And that was just one time I'd done a really good piece of work for this person.
Yeah, I think it comes back to I've heard this online too. I mean, you need to focus on the product and service, right? Like you mentioned Jaguar, you didn't mention a Fiat. Fiat, I don't know if that's maybe a car that maybe is not as attractive, right? But there's a reason you're drawn towards a Jaguar car is because they have invested so much into making the best product and experience
And
possible. So I think
I've
that's
always
another.
had a Jaguar car as well. So, I think once you're used to something and you're familiar with it, it's not necessarily
Mhm.
about the cost. It's just about, what you're familiar with and why change. There's no one that's brought an argument to me that's strong enough to make me want to consider changing, So
Mhm.
actually, this is what I like. And, so ultimately, that's the thing about it. You have to come with a compelling argument to make somebody want to change and go with with the Fiat other than a Jaguar or whatever that is. Why would they want to do that? So that's part of it. That's part of that value proposition, isn't it? I'm not going to do it for the
Yeah,
sake of
yeah.
doing it.
And I think that goes back to you, where you come in and you help these entrepreneurs who, right, is you need to plan, you need to think through all this. And it's not as enough to say, okay, great, you want to tackle homelessness. It's like, okay, how are you going to do that? And why is someone going to come to you versus go to
Well,
the social services provided by the government and
why
all
do you
that?
want to do it? Why do you want to do
Hmm.
it? Why is this for you?
Yeah.
Why do you feel
I,
that you want to
I
turn it
want,
into a business?
yeah, I'm sure you come across that a lot. So I'm curious too. So how often are you meeting with social entrepreneurs and you're saying, okay, you have a lot more work to do versus, okay, wow, you have a great idea and you're ready to move forward and launch this? Is it a lot of people that come to you, they have an idea, but they're just in the very beginning stages of it, and it's like, okay, well, you have to do this
Some
list of
people
10
have no
things to even
idea,
have
and
a
what I
viable
do
business.
is, yeah. So some people have no idea. So what I do is I help them to shape it. I don't shape it for them, but I help them through questioning. So my approach really is about asking the questions, helping, giving some. So really, they're developing it themselves, but I'm helping them to shape it. Do you see what I mean? So it really is
Hmm.
important that it's their thing. It's not influenced by what I think or what I want. It's got to be what they think and what they want. It's theirs. And I think that that's really important, that people come and they don't have a clue where the starting point is. And so I help them to find out what their own purpose is and what would be good for them, and how much money do you actually need? Is this just a top up salary,
Hmm.
or is this going to be your main source of income? because those are the key questions. And then things start to shape from there. It's like putting a picture together, isn't it? And this is where it's taking you.
No, I think that's great. And I want to pivot a little bit. This is going to be unrelated, but I think you have a unique perspective on this. So I'm really curious, and just considering your background in working with vulnerable people, populations, I'm curious what, from your perspective and your experience, what society get wrong about those vulnerable groups. Maybe it is someone who is currently homeless or someone who has recently committed a crime. And I think the general perception is to immediately look down on those people, or society can look down on them. But what have you learned working with those people, or what are the biggest things that people get wrong about those vulnerable populations?
Well, I think that we need to really look at the fact that everyone's got strengths, and try to not be judgmental of everything and everybody all the time. Yes, you need to keep things in mind for safety perspectives, but I had a youth offending service that came to me one time, and they said, well, look, actually what we want is we want your team to work with these 12 individuals. We need to get them from selling drugs, intent to supply, to 9 to 5 work within 6 months, because they had a non-custodial sentence. And I said, I can't work with this particular group, and part of the reason is because you've set that target out from going to selling drugs to 9 to 5 work. It's not possible, because what you're asking me to do is change a habitual behavior within 6 months. I can't do that. But what I can do is, if you put the money towards enterprise, that can work, because they already know how to sell drugs. They already know how to sell, negotiate, count money, do a good bit. They're good at all these things. So I don't need to change their behavior. I just need to change the product. I need to take away the drugs and replace it with sand or water or whatever that is. That is what's going to work. And so just think about it in that kind of sense. They have got skills. Look at I once said to somebody, just being a bit controversial, that drug dealers make really good leaders. And they said, oh, are you saying that drug leaders should really lead the world? And I said, no, I'm not saying that, but just don't write them off, because ultimately, when the pandemic, they were the first ones that got their market sorted. They were Uber drivers before you knew it, while everybody else was in headline. Oh, what's going on? They had it all sussed. If they're not good leaders, they end up dead. So they must be offering something. Are they bad leaders, or are they good leaders? They're good leaders doing the wrong thing. But if we took their leadership and done the right thing, then it's going to make for better leaders. Are you following me, Connor?
Yeah.
Because what we've got at the moment is bad leaders in organizations trying to do good things, applying their bad leadership to good things, when really what we need is good leadership applied to the good things.
Yeah.
That's my philosophy.
I think that's a great philosophy. And maybe my next question related to what I just asked is, and I think you may have just answered it. I mean, what's the key between someone, a criminal that is reformed and kind of turns their life around and begins contributing positively to society in whatever means, getting a regular job or whatever, versus someone that remains in the system and continues to commit crimes throughout the rest of their life? And I think you may have answered it a bit, but I don't know if there's anything to add there.
I don't think there's anything more to add there. I think that the main thing I would highlight really out of what you've just said is that if you've got somebody that's been in the system and coming out and trying to do good now, you've got to really, whilst I think that everyone deserves a chance, depending on the kind of, conviction and things like that, there's going to be limitations, but you've got to be realistic. You've also got to make sure that, if you're going into the industries that I've just talked about, there are some some constraints around clearances and checks and things like that. Some organizations may not necessarily want to take the risk, some others will. But you've got to make sure that it's about rebuilding that trust, making sure you've got the right people around you that can go in and do particular things, even if you have to do another area. But there are more and more organizations that are looking for people with lived experience, in this area, that they want to help them with their business and things like that. So I would actively encourage it. And I would say that these people have different skills. When I back in the day, when I managed operational sites and young offenders, you would come there, people in the criminal justice system, you think, well, actually, I can't make a CV. They can't make a CV, they would say to me. Well, actually, yes, you can, because, you'd have people that would come there and they have different skills. Some would come every single week on time. Now they're the people that I'd want to be driving my bus. Did you see what I mean? Or my train, because they're on time, they're reliable, they're there every week. They might not contribute very much in the discussions, but you can rely on them. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
So all of these kind of things are things that we kind of brush to one side, and we don't look at that. We just look at the really obvious, the people that are great and stuff like that. But quite often I found as well that the people that think that they're great are the ones that have the greatest egos. And I know that from when I used to run my netball teams, because the people that were the best were the ones that were more likely to not want to come to training on a weekly basis. So I used to make sure that the ones that came to training on a weekly basis, you could see them developing. I would invest my time in those people, because you always knew where you stood. They were there. They were, they were loyal. And the others that thought that they were the greatest would want to just rock up when it's a match. Well, actually, no, it doesn't work like that. And you will find in my team, it certainly won't work, because you'll find that you're not on the team. I will much rather have people that are there on a regular basis. So when you look at these individuals, you have to look at what their skills are. And ultimately, I led an organization where someone said, oh, this person is a bad influence. Well, actually, are they a bad influence or are they a good influence? They were just influencing the wrong things. But if I got them to influence the right things, then they can continue to influence everybody around them with the right things, not the wrong things. And that's how it works. And I think that we spend too much time trying to change people and trying to change behavior, rather than leaving people and leaving the behavior and replacing what the behavior is directed to, or the thing it's directed on.
Yeah.
Yes?
I think it relates to building a high quality team at a company or organization as well. I mean, but I think maybe the issue is that when you have someone that has a criminal history, they're just placed in this bucket of just bad. And you're saying that's not generally true. That's an overgeneralization of.
Well, I mean,
Of
look for the good. Look for the good and help them to empower them with the good things, because actually, especially if they're, they might have been selling drugs and things like that. They've got some entrepreneurial skills there. Why would you overlook that and try and get this person squeeze them into a 9-to-5?
Yeah. No, I think it's a really good point.
I mean, that's how I approach things, and it's worked for me, and I've had some really good results as a result of it. But this is an industry that I've been in for 30 odd years. I've been really watching people, trying to understand them. In some of my work, I've hung about with police officers, so I really get into this people watching thing, and yeah, people are fascinating, but the more you understand them, the better the results.
Yeah. All right. So I know we've covered a lot of topics. Are there any final words or anything to round out? And I know compassion is a theme. Anything maybe just to your core message, just to remind the audience of what the key is to running a successful organization or being a successful social entrepreneur? I mean, is there any way to kind of tie that together and concisely? It might be difficult to do, but I'm curious.
Yeah,
as we kind
I
of
think
close
for an
out here.
organization, the main thing I would say is to really be aware of the compassionate, the 4 Ps that I've put together: purpose, people, planet, and profit. Really think about how that looks. And if it's not profit for P, it's performance, because not everyone's thinking about driving those profits. You've got the compassionate C's, and those compassionate C's are, community, communication, consultation, co-creation, and co-production. Think about those, and it's rather than I, replace it with we, empower others. And I would just say, we don't we don't hold on to power and become more powerful. We become more powerful by giving it away to empower others, because it's the ripple effect. That's what I would say for organizations. For social entrepreneurs, just really think about, if it's something that the world needs, are you really good at it? Because you need to think about it in that kind of sense. Really find your purpose, think about the finance as well, and see where the two meet together. And that is really your starting point for the next stage of your journey, because you can come up with a really good idea, but realize that you're not going to generate enough money from it, or you're not good enough at it. So really think about it from that perspective, and it will take you in that direction. And if anyone needs any assistance, I'm always happy to have a complimentary conversation with people. Got, startup hubs and clubs and audios and things like that, and I'm always happy to kind of support and help where I can.
Yeah, so maybe we can end here. Where can people find you specifically? What do you want me to put in the description? Your website, your LinkedIn, anything? What would you prefer? How can people reach out to you?
Well, I think LinkedIn is the most obvious place. There's lots of information there, lots of moving posts. My website is there as well. Wherever I can be found. Google me, you'll find me. So, but LinkedIn is there, website is there. The website lists of services, LinkedIn, it's all moving parts, and it will just tell you what I'm thinking on a daily basis, or some of the projects I'm working on. So thank you for having me.
Sounds good. Yeah, thank you for taking the time, Toni. I learned a lot. I think you have a lot of great advice, a great cause. And so as you just mentioned, your LinkedIn, your website will be in the description. Again, thanks for taking the time, and I wish you the best of luck.
Thank you so much, and take care.